Hello, and welcome to Forging a Minecraft Mod lecture number 2, items. So last time we sort of set up a basic mod. It had a few different things, but it didn't do anything. Right? We had a mcmod.info file to give it some information. We had a config file for the user to set different things, and we managed to export it so we could play it in the Minecraft launcher. But what did it do? Well, nothing. We didn't actually start the game even. So let's make sure to create something. And this lecture is called items. So it would make sense to well, add an item of some sort. And to do so, I'm first going to create a package here, so we can have one where we store the different items. Items. Here we go. What I'm going to do is create a class here called item wand. Like so. But I also need to extends item and import that. Right. So before I continue now, we don't have much at all here. We can take a closer look. Go into that mode. I just extend item, and yes, I know some errors there. This item class that we want to extend, that's the item class of Minecraft, and what that means is it's, well, the basic item, and the basic item is not like anything you can find in the world when playing. So if you have like an iron sword, your friend has an iron sword, that zombie has an iron sword, and well, you have an iron sword in your chest, that doesn't mean that we have 4 different items of iron sword. That means that we have one single item called iron sword, and then we have something called an item stack, which refers to this item. So what we're creating here is the very base item of this wand that we're going to create. So we create the base, and then we have an instance of that base, and then you can create item stacks of that item. We will see that in action further along into this lecture, but I just wanted to mention that we're not creating multiple instances of this item wand. We will create one single one. So what we need to do is, of course, create a constructor here, item wand, and the only thing we want to give it is the ID. So we want to use an ID when creating this item wand, and we don't really bother about that in here, but in the superclass, the item itself, we need that ID, so that's what we're going to send along, like that. Sweet. We want to do 2 other things in here. First of all, we might want to set which creative tab we want to find this wand in, and this wand is going to be fairly offensive, not offensive like bad words and stuff, but offensive because we're going to attack people with it. So why not put it in combat? So I'm not creating my own creative tabs. Sorry. So I'm not creating my own creative tab. I'm just going to use one of the vanilla ones. However, in the questions and exercises document that you can do after the lecture, there's one further explorations where it is about how to set up your own tab. And the other thing I want to do is make sure that you can't hold multiple items in the same stack. So the maximum stack size is 1. So that means that in our item stack, you know, these that we have different instances of, we refer to a few different things. We refer to the item, and we refer to the amounts of items we have in that stack. And we make sure that if you have an item stack of this item that we're creating now, you can't have that amount being anything else but 1. So you can't have 2, but if you don't set this part here, it will be the standard, which is 64. Okay, so what do we want to do with this wand? Well, we obviously want to make something fun, because it's fun to do fun things. So what I'm going to use is a method here called, hang on, you can never guess this method for obvious reasons. Okay, so why is this method called func111207_a? Well, when we decompile things with MCP, well, if we just decompile it on our own, we're not going to get any proper names at all on anything. But MCP handles that for us and has a big map of names that it's going to associate with these random names that you don't realize what they are at all. But this map of names, this big sheet of names, well, it is not updated instantaneously, so if this is a new method that has been changed or has been added, then it's going to have a rubbish name like this. So this method that I want to override is called func111207_a, and this is going to be changed in the future for sure. Someone is going to name it, and in the future release of MCP it's going to be in that big table of names, and therefore it's going to be called something else. And that's why it's very, very good to have override here. That means that when that name has changed, we're going to get a compilation error. Alright, you're trying to override func111207_a, but that doesn't exist. And now we can override, it has probably been named, go into the item class and check what it has been named to. So, very important to use override. Of course, you don't have to, but if you don't, you will learn it the hard way when you should. And this method accepts 3 different parameters. So I'm just going to type them here. Okay, like this. So to make an item, what we do is basically override the methods that we have in the item class. This specific method is will basically do things if we use our item. Here's the item stack that we're using. Here's the player that uses it, and here's some mob, some monster, some pig, something, an entity, a living entity that we use it on. So for instance, if we have our wand and right click on, for instance, a pigman, we want to do something with it. So what do we want to do? Well, we can do whatever we want, but let's make something fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do is set the motion of that target in the y-axis to 2, which is basically going to shoot it up into the air. Seems legit? Yeah, I believe so. But what we want to do is we don't just want to shoot it up in the air, we want to make sure that we do it properly. And what do I mean with this? Well, we have the client where you're playing, where you get all the graphics, everything is rendered properly and so on. But then you have the server which you connect to, which does most of the calculations and then just tell the client side where all the different mobs are and things like that. So what we want to do is actually make sure that we only do this part here on the server side. We don't want to do it on the client side, because then the client side and the server side will sort of get a bit out of sync and it will look a bit weird. So we want to make sure that the server is doing all their job, and then it's going to tell the client what's going on. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we need the world that we're currently in. Now we can get that from the target. You can, if we have an entity like the player or the mob that we have, more about entities in lecture number 4, we can get the it's number 5. I think it's number 5 actually. So we get it like that, target.world, and if we have the world object, which is the world we're currently in, we can just call something called isRemote. And if isRemote equals true, that means we're on the client side. If it's false, that means we are on the server side. So by doing this here, like that, we make sure that on the server side we're going to shoot the entity we clicked on up into the air. Then the server will automatically tell the client what's going on, so we will see that on the client side as well. And there we go. This is the only thing I'm going to add to this item at the very moment. So what do I need to do now? Obviously I have a class for this item, but I don't have the actual item. And remember, we only want one single item, but we need to create that one. So what I'm going to do is first of all set up some information that I need in another class here called item info. And I'm going to use this a bit like I had in mod information here. sorry, that was outside of your view. The mod information here that we stored, version and name of and so on of the mod. I'm going to have this item information doing sort of the same thing but for the items. And what I want is, first of all, public static. We're going to expand this later. Public static int wand ID. I want public static final string wand key, and finally public static final final int wand default. Of course, since these are final, I need to give them values. Here we go. Okay, so what is this? Well, these are 3 different values that I'm going to use together with the configuration file that we set up last time. So I have the key I want to refer to it with, I have the ID where I want to store the ID in the end, and also the default ID that we want to use. I've just set it to 24,201. Why have I done that? Well, I need a default one, right? So let's take a look on the config handler here that we made last time. I'm just going to open it like this. So this is just a bunch of rubbish that we made last time. So I don't need this. This is just weird. So I'm just going to remove that and add some proper code here. So what do we have? Well, item info dot wand ID, that's the ID we want, equals config dot get. And what did we do last time? Well, we used get, but we can use something called get item, and that's better when we just want an item ID. It's going to do some things for us. And we can specify, as you can see here, we can specify the category if we want to, or we can just go with only the key and the default ID. And that's actually what I'm going to do now. I'm not going to bother about adding a category. A category can be good if you have multiple categories of items, but if I just have 1 or 2 items, it might seem a bit ridiculous to do so. So I want to add the item info dot key and item info dot wand default, and then I want to get the integer that we get from the configuration file. However, one thing we want to do here is subtract that by 256, and this might seem very, very odd. But what's going on is that the IDs that we use for items, they will be a bit, well, shifted. So when we create them, they will actually get 256 numbers higher than we actually gave it. And that's just how it works with items against blocks and so on. We might take a closer look on that later, I don't know. But basically what that means is that if we subtract 256, then we will get the ID that the user asked for. Otherwise, we will get an ID that is 256 numbers higher. So just subtract by 256 there, and we're all good. So there we go. Now we have loaded the information we want from the configuration file, and all of a sudden we see the power of the configuration file. Now the user can set which ID we want to use. However, we're missing one part. What's that? Well, we're not creating this item still. So that's the final part, and I'm just going to create a class here called items. I think that's good. Okay. Right. So public static item wand. We want to store our wand somewhere. I'm just going to import item here, and it's good to pick the correct one. We want the Minecraft one, not the FML one. So there you go. And I want to add a method here where we init all the different things. So public static void init to create all the items. And how do we do this? Well, it couldn't really be more simple. New item wand, that's the class that we have, and then we give it the ID that we already get with the config, like that. So if we call this method, we'll create a new wand well, a new item want, and we'll store that in want. We will use the ID that we specified, or well, that we have stored in item info. Here, it's that one, and then we have the default value 24201, which will be used if the user haven't changed it, and that's going to be loaded in the config handler like this. Okay, so we're missing one thing, last part. We need to, of course, tell the items, that file that we had, to call that method. So what we're doing now is that we call this method in pre-init here after we set up the configuration handler, so we have loaded the IDs using the config, and then when we do so, we refer to items here. We recreate a new instance of this item, but remember, this is the only one that we do create. This is the only time we do new item one. We shouldn't do that any other time. We do it once with the given ID, and then we will have multiple so-called item stacks. Further look into those in a minute, and those will basically hold the well, refer to the specific item and then the amount and some extra information. So we have multiple item stacks, just one of each and every item. So there you go. I think it's time to start this up and see what we've done. If we've done something. Okay. So let's start it up. If it wants to start. So now it will run it all, read our config, set up the items, and do all of those things. But of course we haven't added all things we want to add to this item. We have a lot of things left. And this took quite a long time. Come on, Minecraft. Here we go. Okay, so what do we want to do now? Well, we can create a new world. I'm going to create another world on that one actually. So let's call this lecture 2, and let's make a super flat one. There you go. So just create a world to test this in. We obviously need somewhere to be, and then we'll see if everything works. We should find this item in the combat tab of the creative window, and then we should be able to use it to, well, activate it on an entity like a mob or something like that, and it should be shot up into the air. So let's see. First of all, let's go into combat, and boom, there we go. Item.null.name. Nice, and let's remove that. I had a debug thingy on. So item.null.name and no icon, but indeed we have our own item in the combat tab. So all of a sudden we have some content in the game here, and we have nothing to use this on. So let's get some spawners. We'll spawn our eggs. Let's get a stack. Okay, there you go. So let's see what happens if we right click. There you go. That's how we do it. Right click again. Sweet. And well, he died. So of course this is not good enough. There's no name, there's no icon. So what should we do? Well, we should add those things. I'm going to start with adding a proper name. What do we need to do those things? Well, we need two things. We need an unlocalized name and a localized name. The unlocalized name is sort of a ID, you can say. So you give one unlocalized name to the actual item, and then when we're done so, we can refer to that unlocalized name when we add our proper name. Why is this good? Well, if we have one ID for the name and want to add multiple languages, then we can just refer to that unlocalized name when we add our names for different languages. However, this course is not going to cover how to set up a mod in different languages. It's outside the bounds of this course. But we still need an unlocalized name that we will refer to, and it's pretty easy to set up. We can do set unlocalized name, and then we give it the name we want to set it to. And just to keep things in the same place, I'm going to add here, I'm going to add the public static final string wand unlocalized name, and I'm just going to call it rocket wand. That seems like a good idea. And we can, well, while we are at it, we might just add the normal name as well. Wand name equals wand of the rocket. Maybe not the best name, but it will do. It's a bit silly, but so is the item. So now we have the values for the ID, but we also have some values here that we're going to use for the name. So what do? Well, we just set the unlocalized name. Oh, right, sorry. It's not info, it's item info dot unlocalized name, like so. So that's the first step. Now we have distinguished this item from all the other items because it has another unlocalized name than the others. So each and every item that should have different names should have a different unlocalized name from the rest. If we try to set the name for this item without setting an unlocalized name first, it will still work. However, we will run a problem. If anyone else have an item without a unlocalized name, then that item will also get the name of our item. Because if our item don't have an unlocalized name, then we will name everything without an unlocalized name to our name, basically. So we want to set one so we can distinguish different items when it comes to naming them. And now the naming phase is fairly simple. I'm going to add another method here to keep these things apart, which is going to be called public static void add names. I think that's good. And what I want to add is very simple. We refer to something called a language registry, and then we do add name. What do we add? As you see, it imported it as well up here. And the thing we want to add is, first of all, the item that we have, and that's wand there. It's fairly simple. So just add wand here, and then the name that we want to use. Item info dot wand name. There you go. So we need two steps. We need to add the unlocalized name, and then we need to register the normal name, the localized name, which, if we set it up properly, could be different depending on the language. Now we'll just use one name no matter which language we're using. Then we might want to head over to the mod file itself and go into load here and tell it to, well, items.add names. Make sure to add the names there, because otherwise, well, we would have a method to do it, but we would never call it. So that's the names thing. Now it should call wand of the rocket. Okay, now we should add icons. So it should appear as something, right? Those purple and black boxes, they don't really look that good. And I prepared a few textures, and we'll take a look on that in just a second. If you're watching this live and want to grab them, you can get it from the chat. If you're watching this recorded, you can just get it from the course page, or well, the lecture page, that is. So to set an icon, we might want to go back to the item. So item wand here, like this. And what we want to do is one single simple thing. We want to override a method here. Override, so we have that for overriding, and we want to add something else, another annotation called side only, and then we want to set side only to client. So what does this mean? Well, the side only means that when we compile it, it's only going to compile this to one side. The code that we have is used on both the client side and the server side, but some things like rendering stuff we might just want to have on the client side, and some things, some logic things that only are supposed to be handled on the server, maybe those things are only supposed to exist on the server side. Observe that by doing this on a method, that doesn't mean that if we call it, nothing will happen, like we did up here. Here we've made sure that if we are on the server side, then we will do things, otherwise we'll just skip it. Observe that if we do this, using that side only, it will be removed completely. It won't exist in the compiled code, which will mean that if we try to call it, it will crash. It will say, whoa, I can't find this thing, you're trying to do something stupid. So don't do this and then try to call it from that specific side. So now if we try to call this method, which is going to be called public void register icons, if we try to call that from the server side, then it can't find it and therefore things will crash. Why would we want to do this? Well, if we only need it in one location, and if this icon register only exists on the client side, we can't have a method on both sides referring to it. So we want to register icons on the client side only, not on the server side, because on the server side it will handle logic, where all the places are, what blocks are they, and so on, but it don't care about rendering them. Okay, so let's import those things. Control-Shift-O, and then what we want to do is fairly simple. We use item icon like this, and we set that to register.register icon, and then we need to give it its path. And here's where the troublesome part is. What path should we have? Where should we put our textures? But before doing that, I'm going to set up two constants here, and they are going to be used for the textures basically. So I want public static final string texture location, and I'm just going to use example here. Of course you can add whatever you want, and then I want another one called public static final string wand icon. So that's the name of the icon, and we're going to save this icon. Well, this icon is a PNG file, so it would make sense to do wand.png, but no, we're not supposed to refer to it like that. We're just supposed to refer to it with wand. So the file itself is called wand.png, but we just refer to it with wand. Okay, so now we can set this up properly. We go to item wand again, and what we want to do is item info dot texture location, and then in between the texture location we want to have a colon in between the texture location and the icon name, I should say, wand icon. Here you go. So what we have is first of all the texture location, and then a colon, and then the name of this icon. So where would this put the textures, or well, where are we supposed to put the textures rather to make this work? Well, let's take a look. So here's the MCP folder that I have renamed to well, Steve's example. Actually, we can zoom a bit, and if we go into source and into Minecraft and into example, we can find our code here. We have Steve's example, we have mod information. If we go deeper into items, for instance, we can find item info, items, and item wand, the items that we have created. If we, however, go back to example and then back to Minecraft, where we went into the example in the first place, we can see our mcmod.info file down here. At the top here, we can see a folder called assets. That's the one you will have to create. That is not, it's not there from the start. You will have to create that one. So if I open that there, here I have example. Why do I have example here? Well, let's take a look. Let's go into item info here. Here it says example as a texture location. So the thing you put before the colon is what you're supposed to have as the folder name here inside the assets folder. If we go deeper, we can find textures. It's supposed to be called textures. In there we can find items. It's supposed to be called items because we're trying to register an icon for the items. If we try to do it for blocks, which we'll see next lecture, we should call it blocks, this subfolder here. And inside here we have a few different icons. The one we will focus on right now is the wand.png. So since that is called one.png, we refer to it with the name Wonder here. And there we go. So first of all, the location there, in this case example, and then a colon, and then the name of the icon, like so. So right, so what do we have to do now? Well, actually nothing more. It's just about starting it all and see how it goes. However, one a bit weird thing now in 1.6 is that when we're trying to load this texture, it's actually going to complain and say, I didn't find this texture. I don't know if you saw it, it went past quite quickly, I think. So it's going to say, well, I didn't find this texture, but then it's also going to say, right, I'm reloading the textures, and oh, right, I found it. To be honest, I don't really know why that happens, and it's probably just a sort of a bug because 1.6 is new. If I realize why that happens, it's not a problem for your code at all, then I'm going to put that on the lecture page or something like that. There you go. So now we have one of the rocket, and it has this icon that I refer to. Apart from that, it's going to work all the same, but we have an icon and a name. Hello. There you go. Pretty sweet, don't you think? So, well, creative mode is good and all, right? Yeah, it is, but survival, we might want to have a recipe for this item. So how do we set that up? It's very important to be able to do that, right? And I'm just going to add another method here called public static void register recipes, like that. And then of course we will have to call that from when we load our mod. I'm just going to make sure to do that right away. We can do that in here. So items.register recipes. Of course, I'm calling these from the same spot, so I could just have one method called add names and register recipes, but well, yeah, why would I? I can just separate these two, keep it a bit organized. Right, so what you want to do now is refer to something called GameRegistry.addRecipe. Add recipe. However, we find that we have two different options here. We can add a recipe with something called iRecipe and something with the item stack output and some parameters there afterwards. And which one would we want to use? Well, when we create a recipe, we can create our own recipe type if we want to. For it to act a bit different than the normal recipes, we can have a recipe type where it sums up the values. If we give each item a specific value, we sum up the values of the different items in the crafting grid, and if those values sum up to something greater than a specific number, we might want to be able to craft an item out of them. So sort of a, I don't know, a bank system. You give it a lot of items, you get some cash out, I don't know. So that's totally possible if we create our own recipe type, which is that first thing there, the iRecipe one. However, if you just want to create normal vanilla recipes, we can just use the other one here. And if we do this one here, we're going to add a shaped crafting recipe. You know, you have to put them in specific locations as well. Okay, so what do we do here? We have two parameters, and the first parameter is simple, the other one is quite complex, what we need to add. So the first one is just an item stack. You know, these instances of items. So what I want to add here is new item stack, and then the item I want to create the item stack from, and now Eclipse devs a bit. There you go. So I create a new item stack using this item. So like I said, we don't create any new items, but here we use the item to create a new item stack of that item. And if we want to, we can specify how many ones you would get from this crafting recipe by doing something like that. 1 and then comma and 10. Or we can just stick with 1, or if we don't add that at all, it's going to give us 1 of that item. So this is the output, that's the simple part. But then we need to specify how this recipe looks like. And it's a bit, well, weird if you just type it all on one line. It might be a bit tricky to realize what it is. So I'm going to split it up on a few different lines so it's easy to read. Of course, you can just put it all in one single line to make it more compact. Okay, so what we need is an object here, an object array, like this, and then what we want is a few different things here. So I'm just going to set up some of these things, and I'll tell you exactly what they do. Okay, there you go. So the reason why I put these on different lines was for you to be able to see it better. What we have here is basically the crafting grid. So here we have the top row, here we have the middle row, and here we have the bottom row. The space here and any other spaces means that we don't want anything to be there. But what does the slash and the X means? What item should we have there? Well, we need to specify that, and to do so, we first need to add a character. A character, for instance, like that, you know, a single quote X, single quote, and that's the X there. So what do we want to have for the X? Well, then we can specify the item here. So what item do I want to have on the top of that want? Well, why make things that make sense? I'm going to use a golden carrot. Then we can specify the other things, which is the slash here, and what I want to use for them are the, well, a stick. And then we make sure to close this up afterwards, like so. So what we need to do here is we need to add a sort of a crafting grid here, separated on different lines, so it would be easy to see, where space is nothing, and we can use different symbols to symbolize different items, and then we specify those items in the end. Why did I use an X and a slash? Well, two slashes. Well, that's completely optional what you would use, but I used it so it would look sort of like a wand. You can use any characters, so it's totally fine to use something else. We could go with like an S for stick and G for golden carrot to make sense in that way, but well, it's just a matter of taste, I guess. And it's complaining about that item stack, so let's import that. Control-Shift-O. There we go. So now we have a recipe. Let's see if that works by starting the game. So we created an item stack of the wand, and by default that's just one in that item stack. But of course, if we add -10, for instance, we would get 10 wands. Then we specify the crafting grid and the items that these symbols mean, basically. There we go. So let's see. There you go. It still works. But now we want a crafting bench, 2 sticks, and finally, where do you find golden carrot? There you go. Okay. So the recipe I chose was 2 sticks like that, and a golden carrot at the top, and boom, we have a wonderful rocket that we crafted instead of cheated through creative mode. Nice. So there you go. Now we can add a crafting recipe as well, which is quite important to have if you want to make something in survival. Okay, what's the next step, you might wonder? Well, at the moment all our items are the same, or well, all the item stacks, I should say, because that's what they are the exact same. What if we want to do something different with them? Okay, so what might that be? Well, what I'm going to add is add a counter to each item, so it counts how many times we've used this item. So if you shoot up the pigman into the air, it's going to be increased by 1. If you shoot it up again, it's going to increase again, and so on. So we can keep track of that, and those counters will be individual to each and every instance of our wand. We'll see that in just a bit. So what we want to do is quite simple. In here, let's zoom in like this, and what we want to do is we refer to the item stack. So as you can see, we actually do get which item stack the player used. So item stack dot set item damage, and the item damage we want to set it to is item stack dot get item damage +1. So what is this item damage? Well, the item damage is an integer, or well, more precise, a short, which is a shorter integer, and you can store numbers between 0 and some about 32,000. And these values are usually used for tools, or usually is the thing to say, but they used to be only used for tools to determine how broke they were. So, alright, I have a fresh diamond pickaxe and my friend has one that is almost broken, so we obviously want two different tools to have different durability, so therefore we can't save that as a fixed value that is stored in the item class itself. If we added something like private int durability left or something like that and changed that here in the item class, what we would see was that if one diamond tool was used, then all the diamond tools would lose their durability, because they all would share the durability. Like I said before, the item that we create, we only create one single instance of it, and therefore if we change it, it's going to change for all item stacks referring to that item. So what we want to do is change some values of the item stack instead, and what we can do here is use something called the item damage. Like I said, a value, an integer value that goes from somewhere from 0 to about 32,000. And what I'm going to do here is just increase it by 1 each time you use it. So we can use that for a counter instead. But just having a counter like that doesn't really make too much sense. We might want to take a look at it as well, so we can see how many times we've used it. And we can use another method here that I'm going to override, which also is only used on the side, the client side. Sorry. And this is called public void add information, and we get one item stack, one player, one list, and finally a boolean extra. And what we can do here is added a description, you know, the information below the item name, depending on the item stack and the player, and if we want to show extra information. So, for instance, with potions effects, we want to add information below the name, like what effects we have and so on. And the same thing goes with enchantments. We also want to add extra information, but that's handled on their own. So if we add an enchantment to something, that text is going to be added. But if we want to add our own information, we can do that using this method called add information. And as you saw that I accidentally had on in the beginning, if you hit F3H, then you, in vanilla, you will go into the debug mode where you will see some item IDs and so on. And this is basically a boolean telling us if we are in that that mode or not. So if we are in that mode, then that one will be true. So maybe we want to output some extra information, some debug information, I don't know. But what we want to do here, well, first I might want to import a list, and here's a, well, something that you can very easily do wrong. We have two lists, and one is java.util for utilities.list, and one is java.avt.list. So which one are we supposed to use? Well, it's the top one here, the java.util.list. And how would you tell? Well, it's a bit tricky to know, actually. It's just, you will have to learn that the type of list we want is the utility list, not a graphical list. This is something used for graphics. So we want that one. Import the correct one, otherwise you will be in a lot of trouble. It won't work, basically. So what can we do here? Well, we can do info.add. This fun thing has been used. And then we just get the item stack. Get item damage times, like that. So we're going to add some information about how many times this fun thing has been used. It's obviously a fun thing. It's one that shoots pulses and pigment into the air. And we just get the information from the item stack itself. So remember, we can't refer to a field that we have here in the item, private int my field, because that's going to be shared by all the item stacks, because we just have one instance of the item. This is very important, and that's why I repeat it. But if we refer to the item damage of the item stack, that's going to be unique for each stack. Let's run this. See how it looks like. However, one thing which hasn't anything to do with the item damages themselves, but with this function here. This function, this method, func11207_a, what that one does is that if we are in creative mode, we're going to get a copy of the item stack that we're using, and we will get that copy so we won't like destroy it. For instance, if it's a saddle that we want to mount a pig with, if we're in creative mode, if we just get a copy instead, then if we break that copy, we'll still have the original saddle in our hand, which means that we can use the saddle multiple times. So in this case, it's going to be sort of a trouble for us, because then we can't really change these values properly. But, well, what we can do, first, I'm going to move that up, it's just, of course, go into survival mode. But like I said, the reason why I have to go into survival mode has nothing to do with us wanting to change damage values. You can do that in creative as well. It's just that the method we're using makes sure that we won't change anything in creative, so it can preserve the old item as it were. So now I'm in survival, and if I can take a look here. So we have this fun thing has been used 0 times, and this fun thing has been used 0 times. Shoot that dude into the air. And this fun thing has been used 1 time, so formatting issue there, and this fun thing has been used 0 times. So we have different values for the different items. 2 times, 3 times, and then if I use this one for the last time here, I get that one up to 1 time as well. Nice. So what we have is we increase the damage value 1 each time we use it, and then we can add that as extra information. But that has been everything for now. After the break, we will take a look on how we can use this damage value to do something more apart from just, well, printing out some information down there. But like I said, that's after the break, so I'll see you in about 15 minutes.